Good morning, church. Thank you so much for tuning in and streaming the first of our 2 weekends where we're taking a little break from in-person meeting. And this first week is all about building an altar, which we'll tell you more about in a bit. But Stephanie, we wanted to talk a little bit about our Christmas. So Merry Christmas to all of you. We hope it was great. And our first question that you can dialogue with your friends and family that we want to talk about is, what was the favorite gift that you gave somebody? Where did you just nail it?
I made a batch of homemade vanilla and gave that to about 12 different people. So I've wanted to do that for a few years, and I'm pretty excited about that. Steph,
where did you learn to make homemade vanilla?
Where else? Pinterest.
That is awesome. This year, Audrey it was almost like a gift for her to give this. So Audrey always wanted one of those life-size Barbies, and Mom and Dad never got it for her. Shame on you, in-laws, shame on you. But Audrey really wanted to give that to Paige this year in a life-size Elsa. So we have this Elsa that's like this tall, and when she opened it, her scream shattered windows. But it was glorious because she was so excited.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So if you guys want to have fun asking those that are watching the service with you that question, that's awesome. But let's jump into worship.
Come thou fount of every blessing, to my heart to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise. Teach me some melodious sonnet, sung by flaming tongues above. Praise the mount I fixed upon it, mount of thy redeeming love. Here I raise my hither by thy help I come, and I hope by thy good pleasure safely to arrive at home. Jesus sought me when a stranger, wandering from the fold of God, he to rescue me from danger interposed his precious blood. Oh, to grace how great a debtor daily I'm constrained to be, and let thy goodness like a fetter bind my wandering heart to thee. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it, prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, Lord, take and seal it for thy court above. Come thou fount of every blessing, to my heart to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise. Teach me some melodious sonnet sung by flaming tongues above. Praise the mount I've fixed upon it, mount of thy redeeming love.
The same God that never fails will not fail me now. You won't fail me now in the waiting. The same God who's never late is working all things out. You're working all things out. Yes, I will lift you high in my lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Yes, I will sing for joy. My heart is heavy all my days. Yes, I will. Same God who never fails will not fail me now. You won't fail me now in the waiting. The same God who's never late is working all things out. You're working all things out. Yes, I will lift you high in my lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Yes, I will for all my days. Yes, I will. I choose to praise, to glorify the name of all names, and nothing can stand against. I choose to praise, to glorify the name of all names, and nothing can stand against. I choose to praise, to glorify the name of all names. Nothing can stand against. I choose to praise, to glorify the name of all names. Nothing can stand against. Yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Yes, I will for all my days. Yes, I will for all my days. Yes, I will.
So we've passed Christmas, we're coming into the new year, and we want to take a moment to look back at everything that's happened. And so, Steph, the question that I wanted to ask you, and you guys can ask yourselves this too, what were some of the most challenging things that happened in 2020? As we all know, this was one intense year. So for you, what was challenging, and what brought the most pivot moments for you?
Probably just a lot of loss. So obviously we didn't get to have skills camp. We haven't had all our kids come back into the building yet. So that kind of thing, just having to completely redirect over and over and over again.
Yeah.
What about you?
Well, I felt, being new to the young adult position, I was coming off of a couple years of honestly some very, very fruitful times in ministry. And so to go from big groups and fun events to nothing for almost half a year and not getting to see a lot of the people that I love to death, that was hard. And so my leadership, just personally, I struggled a lot this year in how to lead them when you can't be with them. And so, and I'm with you, my kids missing out on different sports activities and skills camp and other even church events. That was hard. So we are not the only ones that have ever experienced difficult times. And so Pastor Jeff is going to take us through a story of Israel where God took an obstacle in front of Israel and turned it into an opportunity to reset their memory and pull them back into intimacy with Him. So we hope you enjoy the message.
Last week I was talking to a friend of mine. This friend's been married for 50 years, and we were just talking back and forth about the things that he's learned in marriage. And it was funny, he said when he first got married, he was dumber than a box of rocks. These are his words, not mine. And I thought, well, he doesn't have a very high opinion of rocks, does he? Because he wasn't complimenting himself. It's a funny phrase. We use that term a lot. For many of us, we look at a rock and we're like, big deal. It's an inanimate, hard, unfeeling object. Maybe for you, when you look at a rock, you think, that's an intruder, that's an invader, something to get rid of. If you got a rock in your shoe, you're going to sit down and you're going to take your shoe off and dump that rock out. If you're digging a garden, if you're planting a garden and you come across a big old rock, that rock's an intruder. We got to get rid of it. Maybe you're out mowing the grass and you come across a rock. What are you going to do? You're going to get rid of that intruder. But if you're like me, when you see a rock, that's an invitation. It's an invitation to go pick it up and throw it at something. If you're near a body of water, you got to pick that rock up and see how far you can throw it. Or if it's flat, you're going to skip that rock. I love rocks. If I'm walking down the road and I see a rock, something inside of me, an instinct takes over. I cannot not walk over and kick that rock. I love rocks. So regardless of whether you look at rocks and you think they're dumb, or you look at a rock and you think that's an invader that I need to get rid of, or whether you love rocks and you see them as an invitation to experience joy, my hope today is to completely change the way you look at rocks. Why? Well, because there was a day God did that very thing for the nation of Israel. He said, for many of you, you're going to see this as just an inanimate, dead, unfeeling object. But I see it altogether differently. And I want to change your perspective off of a rock and onto my provision, on my ability to keep my promises. I want to change the way you see rocks. And that's what I want to do for you today. So let me set the scene. How did God change and reorient the nation of Israel off of a rock and on to Himself? Well, the nation of Israel spent a considerable amount of time wandering in the wilderness. They were in captivity for many years in Egypt, and God sent a deliverer. He sent Moses to rescue His people and lead them out of Egypt, out of captivity, into what He called the Promised Land. But for 40 years, the nation of Israel wandered. They experienced hardship. They had trials. They experienced loss. They had obstacle after obstacle after obstacle. And yet they continued to persist in their journey. It was a long journey. And as that journey came to an end after 40 years, they came up against one more obstacle. It was the Jordan River. We're coming to you live from the banks of the mighty Willamette. And this must have been what it felt like for the nation of Israel as they were approaching the Promised Land and they walk up to the banks of the Jordan River and they think, here we go again. How in the world are we going to get across this insurmountable barrier between us and the promised land? Well, God spoke to their leader, Joshua. He said, Joshua, I got a plan. I'm going to follow through on my promise. You might think you're done, but I'm not done. I've got a plan. Here's what I want you to do, Joshua. I want you to send the priests ahead of the people. I want you to take the ark. The ark was a symbol of God's presence with the people. And he told Joshua, I want you to send the priests carrying the ark. Just step out in faith into that Jordan River, and you watch what happens. So they did. The moment those priests stepped into the river, God did a miracle. Just like he did with the Red Sea, he held the waters back. So the people were able to cross over on dry land. And after that, God did something very, very interesting. Let me read to you from the book of Joshua what happened after this miraculous event. Joshua chapter 4 says, when the whole nation had finished crossing the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, choose 12 men from among the people, one from each tribe, and tell them to take up 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, from right where the priest stood, and carry them over with you and put them down at the place where you will stay tonight. God had 12 men walk back into that riverbed and pick up a rock. And they carried those rocks over to the other side, the side where the promised land was. And he had them stack them up. Why? Because he wanted the people to have a physical reminder of what he had done. Those people needed a reminder. They needed something tangible, a memorial, an altar, if you will, to remind them of this unbelievable event, this miraculous event that they should never forget. So after those men were obedient and they took those stones, listen to what Joshua says later. He said to the Israelites, in the future, when your descendants ask their fathers, what do these stones mean? Tell them, Israel crossed the Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the Jordan before you until you had crossed over. The Lord your God did to the Jordan just what he had done to the Red Sea when he dried it up before us until we had crossed over. He did this so that all the people of the earth might know that the hand of the Lord is powerful, and so that you might always fear the Lord your God. Why did God have them build an altar? Because if someone would have asked the Israelites, so how was your trip? Tell me about your journey. What were the last 40 years like for you? You know what the Israelites would have been very justified to say? Things like, man, the desert sure was hot. Man, there's nothing worse than getting sand in your eye. Kind of got sick of the manna. You should see the blisters on my feet. My mom and dad passed away out there. The Israelites would have had so many justifiable reasons to list the negative things, the hardships, the unmet expectations, the barriers and the obstacles. But God didn't want them focused on that. He wanted them focused on his provision, on his kept promise. And he needed something physical, not because they were evil people, not because they were dumb, but because they were human. We all need reminders. We are prone to forget. And when we build an altar, when we put something physical down, a memorial, you know what it does? At first it catches our eye. Then it grips our heart. Then it resets our memory. That's what an altar does. An altar resets our memory. And it takes our perspective off of our circumstances, and it puts our perspective back on the mighty hand of God. And that's exactly how chapter 4 ends. Joshua tells the people, when your descendants are walking down the banks of this river, and they say, hey, Dad, what's that big pile of rocks for? You know what it's going to do? It's going to reset Dad's memory. And he's going to say, son, sit down. I got a story to tell you. You're never going to believe this. These rocks memorialize. They remind us of the day that God did this incredible miracle. And not only that, let me tell you about the Red Sea. Let me tell you about water that poured out of a rock. Let me tell you about this really cool, flaky bread that God gave us every single day. You see, a memorial helps us remember God's provision because there's another day coming, and we're going to have to be reminded that God is at work in our lives. Friends, you and I have had a hard journey. 2020 has been difficult. 2020 has been a year full of no's, a year full of unmet expectations. It's been hard. It's been a long journey. And you and I need a memorial. We need something that will catch our eye and it will remind us. I don't mean to diminish the hardships and the trials that we have encountered over this past year, but it's actually because of those hard times that we need a reminder all the more. We need to build an altar, something physical, that when we hit a dry patch, when we hit a period of our spiritual lives where we feel like our prayers aren't being answered, we begin to wonder, God, do you care about me at all? God, do you even exist? We need something so that when we look out our back window and we see that pile of rocks, it grips our heart and then it resets our memory and we think, oh yeah, I remember that rock. I remember that rock represents the day we adopted our child. After years of waiting and endless piles of paperwork and a lot of dollars, that rock represents our child coming home. Oh, and that rock, I remember that relationship that I never thought would be restored. And yet God allowed us to humble ourselves and to forgive ourselves. Oh yes, and that rock, and that rock, and that rock. You see, when we build an altar, when we allow our eye to be focused on something that will jar our memory, it allows us to take our eyes off of our circumstances and to remember the mighty hand of God, just like the Israelites did. So I want to encourage you to memorialize 2020. Whatever the size of your family, if it's just you, sit down with pen and paper and write down the things that God has done this last year that have been good. And if you're part of a bigger family, sit on the couch and go around the circle and ask one another, what is something good that God has done? And maybe for you and your family, you're going to want to go out back and you're going to want to put a pile of rocks in the yard. For others, you might not want to do that. You can do something simple. You can grab a vase or a jar like this and get some marbles and throw some marbles in there. You can get a journal and just list them. There are myriad things that you can do to memorialize and to commemorate the good things God has done, because we need to be reminded. We're prone to forget. All throughout the New Testament, we have things like baptism and communion. These are visual reminders of important things that God has done that we can't forget. So friends, what do you need to memorialize? What altar do you need to build so that you will never forget the way God has been involved in your life? Yes, there have been trials. Yes, there are unmet expectations and there are barriers that we all have to face. But God has promised to never leave us nor forsake us. Jesus said, in this world there will be trials, but take heart, for I have overcome the world. Some people will look at this and they'll see nothing more than a pile of dumb old rocks. But my friends, my hope and my prayer is that you will do what God asked the Israelites to do, is to look at these rocks and not see inanimate, cold, unfeeling objects, but rather to see the mighty hand of God that has been at work in your life and will be at work in your life, because He's a promise keeper. He is a good God that loves to bless His children. So this is going to be the last sermon you hear in 2020. And my hope is that it will remind you that a memorial, an altar that you might build, that it will remind you that there's a better day coming, that God is with you, and that he will do miracles in your life as you look to him and you get your eyes off of your circumstances. I pray that when you look out your back window, that memorial will first catch your eye, then it will grip your heart, and it will reset your memory to God's activity and his engagement in your life, because he's good and he loves you.
Kids, now that you've heard Pastor Jeff talk about that pile of rocks, maybe you understand why we gave you a bag of rocks. And some of you have probably already eaten the chocolate ones, but we want you to pull out the real rock right now and just use this as a way to look back at 2020. And we want you to write something on it or have your parents help you write it. And if you don't have a rock, that's okay. You can go outside and find one, or even a piece of paper will work. And we just want you to write something that's going to help you to remember God's goodness. On mine, if I had a pen right now, I would write that God is unchanging. So in 2020, a lot of things changed. The way you did school changed. Maybe the sports that you were involved in changed. But God didn't change, and he never will. So just use this to write something on that will remind you of God's goodness.
And adults, we are serious too about you guys building your own altar. So whether you're a young adult, an adult, a senior, build something that catches your eye, that grips your heart, and that resets your memory to how good God was in this past year. Another thing that we want to draw your attention to is this envelope. We are going to use this, we want you to use this to put the positive things that happened this year and put it in the envelope. And Pastor Mark is going to tell you more about what to do with it next week. Thank you so much for joining us.
Bow at his feet. He has done great things. See what our Savior has done. See how his love overcomes. He has done great things. He has done great things. Oh, hero of heaven, you conquered the grave. You free every captive and break every chain. Oh God, you have done great things. We dance in your freedom, awake and alive. Oh Jesus, our Savior, your name lifted high. Oh God, you have done great and break every chain. Oh God, you have done